Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jenny Riggenbach with the Community Foundation. As we get started here with this really fun conversation with Sue Shulfer, Mary Patoka, and Kelly Caughlan, I first want to thank our sponsors, the UWSP Century School of Business MBA program, and our corporate convening partners, the Century Foundation and Delta Dental of Wisconsin. As for those of you who continue to join us from month to month, this will sound familiar, but for those of you that are new, we like these to be very dialogue focused. So if you have a question or a comment or a story you'd like to share, I know we've got some former Women's Fund board members joining us today. Feel free to raise your hand or join us on putting yourself on video or taking yourself off of mute. Kai-Ying and I will be kind of watching for that as we're talking to bring as many voices into the conversation as we can. So, thank you. Thank you, Mary, and jumping around a little bit, and Kelly and Sue for joining us today. I also want to announce and welcome Sarah Ross, our very first Women's Fund Director. Sarah joined us last week as the very first Women's Fund Director, and we're thrilled to have her. We're going to hear a little bit more from Sarah later this morning. But we also put out our first announcement on that this morning. So if you are in the Women's Fund Network, you likely got an email from us this morning telling you a little bit about Sarah, but we'll hear from Sarah in a little bit. So the Women's Fund is celebrated 25 years in 1997. And these two data points I'm going to share with you, and then we'll bring Sue, Mary, and Kelly into the conversation. To me, it's just incredible. Over 25 years, the Women's Fund has grown an endowment that reached $1 million in 2020, while at the same time they put out $700,000 into the community. And I think as you're going to hear this morning, like that is the path we're going to continue on with the Women's Fund, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that. So, Sue, Mary, and Kelly, thanks for joining us. As we're going to get started, I'd love for each of you to introduce yourselves and share a little bit about the involvement in your history with the fund. I'm going to start with Kelly because I think her longevity is probably the longest. Kelly, you want to tell us about yourself and the fund?
Sure. I have been with the Stevens Point area YMCA. I just celebrated 25 years with them. So I have been a part of the unit with the Women's Fund of Portage County since 1997. I wasn't actually the first YMCA representative, but I joined shortly after they formed. But I was also a founding member of the Women's Fund. So from a personal level, I also joined on board right in 1997 as a founder to the Women's Fund. But it's been a wonderful experience. I've met a lot of really great, strong women, and it's been a really fun experience.
Thanks, Kelly. How about Sue?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I am in my 6th year of being on the Women's Fund Advisory Board, and had some exciting things happening during those 6 years. We'll talk a little bit here in this time frame. And I came to the board as the liaison from the Community Foundation of Central Wisconsin Board. We always make sure that one of us on the Women's Fund is also a Community Foundation board member, as it is a fund of the Community Foundation. And like Kelly, I too am one of the founding members. And in fact, I kind of proudly wear my pin today. The 55 founding members got a pin designed by Brenda Jingles at that time. So been long time contributor to the Women's Fund because I so believed in its mission and its cause.
Great, thanks, Sue. And Mary.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Patoka. My first contact with the Women's Fund was actually at an organizational meeting held at the Sky Club over 25 years ago. It was designed to introduce the concept of a Women's Fund to the community. So very interested from the get-go, did a lot of work on women's issues before that. But over that time, I was also the executive director over at CAP Services. And so many of our programs were beneficiaries of the grant making process. And so connected to the Women's Fund over many years, donor as well. And I just joined the advisory board about 2 years ago. And in that time, I've worked on the strategic planning work, committee work, and the allocations process for the funds that we get out in the community. So as Kelly said, it's a dynamic, exciting group to hang around with. And so I've really enjoyed my time.
Thanks, Mary. And Mary, what you said about back to the Sky Club in that some of that original meeting, how did the Women's Fund get started? What did some of those early conversations look like? That could be to any of you because you were all there, right? I think you were all there.
I think the idea got sparked with the Community Foundation's executive director at the time, Ann Shannon. She had gone to a national convention or national conference for community foundations, and a lot of them there were talking about women's funds that were just forming and just pulling together and happening in other communities. And she got excited about the idea and came back and said, how could we start one here? And I think she pulled in partners based on women's health issues. At the time, it was St. Michael's Foundation. And she also looked at childcare as being another important issue facing women. And so that's how the Y got involved. And so from there, she's just started pulling partners together and having conversations with folks in leadership positions and organizations of leadership positions and got the ball rolling.
Yeah, and credit to, I think that initial meeting came out, Kathy Davis, who's still a real important part of our community. She kind of took the lead of putting a strategic plan together back in 1997, and then they decided to start the endowment fund, and that's where we talked about. A number of us were part of those original contributors, and there were 55 founding members, and they set a goal to try to raise 100,000. And they met it within 2 years to get the fund started and start with the grant making process that, as you said, Jenny, today has now led us to over 700,000 in grants being made.
Fantastic. Mary, do you remember anything else from those early days?
Well, I think that meeting was called The Power of the Purse. And so there was really an effort to see women as philanthropists. The old traditional model was, the male of the household makes the money and makes those financial decisions. And it just wasn't reflective of the times. Women were in the workforce and certainly had their own priorities and passions. And I think that vision of Anne and the founding members really played out. The Community Foundation was for a period of time co-located in a CAP services office. And so Anne Shannon's office was right next to mine. And it was just exciting to see the energy that she brought, and certainly with others, but how she was so committed to moving this forward. And today, the Portage County community draws great benefit from that work. So thanks to her and all those that made these things come to be.
Such a great point, Mary. You and Sue both, talking about Kathy and Anne. It's, this kind of work doesn't just happen because you want it to, right? And it doesn't just happen because you happen to bring a group together one time. It takes a plan and an ongoing energy and partners like Kelly talked about, being the YMCA and at the time, St. Michael's, now the Aspirus Hospital Foundation. And it's also interesting, which I think we'll come back to in a little bit, but healthcare and childcare are two still big issues in our community. So we talked a little bit about how it got started. What are some of the impact stories that you guys are most proud of that the Women's Fund has funded or engaged with or started dialogues over the years?
I think I'll talk about one that is pretty big that I was just very impressed that we really partnered with Ministry, St. Michael's Hospital Ministry Healthcare, creating the breast care center in that campaign. And as I say it, I get goosebumps on my arms, because how important is it for women in our community to be able to have those kind of assessment and care for breasts in the events that someone is diagnosed with breast cancer. The other one that is, I was kind of on the receiving end. I worked with a community organization, and we had something called Project Fresh Clothes, and we got nice grants, small grants over a few years. And I'm going to tell you, I was at the event when mother and or parents and children came to pick up their school supplies, but they also had an opportunity to get some school clothes, gently used, but get some school clothes to start their school year with. And I'll tell you what, when that child has a smile on their face and they're saying thank you, for the new clothes. I mean, there's nothing that hits you in the heart when you see those direct recipients. And that kind of project was only made possible through some Women Fund grants through the years.
And I would echo that. While the fund was growing, the grant amounts weren't always real big over time, but having been part of a nonprofit, every dollar is important. And so the ability to tap into those local resources was really important, especially with some programs. Even though you might get funding, say, from the state or federal government, they want you to demonstrate that you have local support. So you had to document that other dollars were coming into the organization. So while not always big, the cumulative effect of all of that grant making at $700,000 really meant a lot to, I think, the nonprofits in our community.
All that leverage, right? I mean, that's what we
Exactly.
talk about in philanthropy nonprofit. Kelly, how about you? What have been some of the really rewarding impact stories that you felt over the years?
There's been a lot, but I think one of my favorites was, for a number of years, we sponsored something called Camp Discover. And we took a group of girls from local high schools up for a weekend up to Camp Manitowish, and we provided them leadership training. And so it was combined with classroom work, but it was also some mentoring opportunity. And that's kind of a role that I played with some of the girls. And then we also took them to do some traditional camp activities, and just to watch them grow in just those few short days was really incredible. And I still bump into some of those girls. They're adults now, but really still talk about how impactful that was to them to have that opportunity to go up to Camp Manitowish.
That's great. And it's so great to hear. It's like this combination of big impact grants, like what it was a major commitment over a number of years with the breast center, and then weaving in also smaller grants that also had an impact. That it's remarkable that from year to year that the Women's Fund has found ways to do both of those things. And I think from my perspective, joining the foundation almost 2 years ago and being rather new to the Women's Fund, learning those stories and that kind of impact, it's just remarkable. I continue to just be inspired by every woman I've met who has touched the Women's Fund in some way over the years. So let's jump to June 2021, when I joined the Women's Fund, and I think it was one of my first days on the job, or I started at the foundation. One of the first days on the job, I went to the orientation for the new Women's Fund board members, and I know Mary was there, and we had a group of Cindy Weber, I think, was joined at that time. Heather Hubner from Anderson O'Brien. There was quite a big group. And one of the things I think we recognized pretty soon after that, coming out of COVID, right? We were all finally getting back together again in person with a lot of new faces, is that we likely needed to do some planning, some strategic planning. So we stepped into that process. And Mary Sue, do you want to talk a little bit about why that made sense at that time and what our approach was? I know you both joined that committee and really helped lead that effort.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Jenny, you know, we were coming out of COVID, and we also had one of our campaigns, endowment campaigns, that was called the 2020 Vision, and we were coming to the end of it. So even though we had COVID happening, we were able, the Women's Fund, and many of you are on the call today, we thank you for your contributions. We were able to hit that goal that we had set for the Vision 2020 campaign, which was the $1 million mark. So again, quite remarkable over the time frame. So as we hit that goal, and again, we wanted to continue to make as many grants as we could, we said, hey, we're kind of in a pause period of where do we want to take the Women's Fund to the next level? Where do we want to go forward with it? And so we said, hey, it's time to prepare a strategic plan. So we have some good, rich conversation on where that forward movement should go, and get that plan in writing so we're all aligned. And here we are today. We've got a new strategic plan. So that's the history a little bit of why we said, why do we want to do the strategic planning process?
And I would only add to that the world has changed in philanthropy, the needs of women in the community. And so it seemed a good time to do a reset and certainly acknowledge and honor and value all that brought us up to this 25th anniversary, but really to look forward in a way that keeps us relevant, supports our partners in the work that we're doing and how we advance our mission, but also to learn as deeply as possible how best to get the best impact or the deepest impact with the resources we have available.
And I think we went through a pretty defined process of partnering with an external organization. We looked at several organizations and selected to work with one that was goes by the name Sort Sol. They had worked with some other organizations in our community, but they also had great knowledge of what other women's philanthropic groups were doing in our state and also the Midwest. And so it kind of said, hey, we're doing good things here. Let's take and build on it, but let's also get some new ideas where we should take it. And Sort Sol really helped guide us in that process, partner with us.
And it was the first time that we had the Women's Fund had an external group working with us on strategic planning. And it was a long process. We, tell me if I'm missing anything, we did focus groups and surveys at the beginning to kind of hear from women who had been involved and other women in the community. Then the board did a day, and then we narrowed in on some things we'll talk about, and then we tested those ideas. And then the Women's Fund, we took on what we were calling them strike teams this fall to kind of begin to make some of those shifts. Connie, do you want to pull up the refreshed mission and vision, and maybe could we talk a little bit about how this refreshed mission maybe makes sense at this time, and given how much input that we received? Mary, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I would say that in the process of discovery and figuring out what our present state was, we really did try to focus on who our primary stakeholders were. And in the end, that appeared to be nonprofits and organizations that support women, as well as children, but with a little more laser look at impacting women. And so after the process, we realized that that needed to be reflected in our mission, updated mission. And so there really is a focus on helping women connect, engage, but also support one another. you know, we sometimes, I think, recognize that women are a little too hard on other women, and we really want to kind of shift that a little bit more. And to the extent the Women's Fund has opportunities to create those connections and engagements, we think that's going to be important. But certainly to look at how women might be part of the Women's Fund in a broader and deeper way than maybe more than we experienced in the past. And so how do we become more inclusive of women and the people in our community who care for them? So this is what the end result of a long process was. And I will note the previous mission specifically mentioned children. And I do want to point out right now that we are not excluding children from our focus, but we do want to see the connection to the women and helping them thrive. We all feel that if we take care of women, they will take care of their families. And so that's where it's got to start in our minds. But we're excited about this. It'll give us a little more razor focus when we're looking at grant making and truly how we invest the resources that we have available to us.
Thanks, Mary. You know, one of the things I really loved about how this came together is it also reflects what we always say in community foundations, right? And community foundations are here to meet the changing needs of a community. And we're here to honor the donor intentions as the community changes and shifts. And so that mission of being focused on issues important to women, it's now built into just the infrastructure of the Women's Fund to always be mindful and thinking about what are the issues that are most important and impactful of women, so that we can achieve this shared vision of Portage County being a vibrant and inclusive community where women thrive and lead. So this is probably a really great opportunity to have Sarah introduce herself a little bit, because another outcome of the strategic plan was hiring a director, a part-time director for the very first time. Sarah, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're excited about in your second week?
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I am incredibly excited to join a really remarkable team, having been in the room at least one time with a lot of the current advisory board members. I really was sort of blown away by just the force and the leadership. And so I am really, really looking forward to be able to engage alongside this wonderful group who have established a really incredible program. I'm coming from the performing arts. So I currently teach scenic design at UWSP. I've had a career as a scenic properties, costume, and puppet designer, most recently coming from Chicago, but in 2017 landed here in Stevens Point and began to really feel excited about maybe sticking around in this community and extending, wanting to gain entrance into networks throughout the community, the neighboring counties and within the state, to one, share my love for the performing arts, and also really to hone in on other values I have, and particularly supporting women who are leading in all different sectors. So since my arrival, I've gotten into a lot of wonderful projects, including joining the MBA program, of which I'm currently a student. In that, I've been able to be a part of an impact fellowship to work with my colleague Jessica Andre and my mentor Lena Matezi, who's the director of the MBA program, to co-found the UWSP Center for Women's Equity, Development, and Leadership. And I think when I began to meet, I met Jenny through Lena, and when I began to talk with Jenny and learn more about specifically the Women's Fund, There was obviously a lot of alignment there between those two organizations. And then was just really ecstatic that the strategic plan included a staff person that could help implement the work that had been written in the strategic plan.
Thanks, Sarah. We're thrilled to have you, and really already seeing some really great questions. I think one of the things I've been most impressed with meeting you is how curious you are, and I think that's going to bode well for the Women's Fund Advisory Board and the broader network that we'll be continuing to build. Kelly, do you want to talk a little bit about like bringing on a staff person? You've been with this as a partner, as a founder for so many years. What the opportunities you see with us bringing Sarah on?
Yeah, I think first of all, I'm thrilled to have Sarah aboard. I've only met her once, but I'm really excited to get to know her better and see how we can connect and grow the Women's Fund. There's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes to take on an initiative like the Women's Fund and to grow and to make things happen within our community. And it's just going to be really nice to have that key person who is kind of the focus of the Women's Fund, the one that will hold all of the glue together, you know, as we work as volunteers and lead the team into the future. I think I'm just really excited about what's going to happen. And in my mind, I see that the Women's Fund has been really successful in what we call treating some symptoms that have been affecting women. But I see our next phase now really making some systemic change in women and for women and what they do within our community. And I'm really excited to be a part of that work and what's going to happen and how we're going to make it happen.
That's great, Kelly. Well said, well said. Why don't we take a little bit of a segue to, we talking about what people might expect from the evolution of the grant making. Mary, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
You bet, you bet. I think historically, our grant making model was really traditional. You put out a call, people respond based on their understanding of how what they would like to do aligns with your mission and your priorities. And that was all good. But I think we're at a point where I think the Women's Fund itself wants to be more proactive in its understanding and learning. So sometimes we counted on grant applications to inform us on what the need is, which is great because nonprofits do a fabulous job of describing needs. But we didn't know what we're missing, who didn't apply, and maybe why didn't they apply? Or is there some emerging need that just didn't line up with the grant cycle? And so I think in the process of our work over the last 9 months or so, we realized that we need to take ownership of deeper learning. And there's plenty of tools available to us. There's certainly all kinds of data, the census, the Alice report. The list is endless. But we also, in that context, feel that we really do not want to, for 1 second, undervalue the work of our partners in the community. Certainly the nonprofits who, through their work, help us advance our mission, but also the other organizations within the community that can help inform us. So I think as we go forward, people will see and feel a little different, a little different sense about our curiosity, led of course by Sarah, but increased curiosity about what's going on in the community in a different way, because we know we've missed opportunities for different reasons, all valid, but we really want to minimize that going forward. So as we evolve, I think, as I mentioned, people will see us in a more active learning and understanding kind of framework. And that will be ongoing. It's not going to be limited to the quarter in which we make a grant. And Sarah, we hope, will help us accomplish that. I have to remind myself our strat plan is a 3 to 5 year plan, and not everything will happen in year one, but we felt it important to have that grant making cycle look or align a little more directly with our vision and hope going forward. Now, another desire of the fund is to look at ways in which we might increase giving over and above what comes from the annual distributions from the endowment. You know, that's growing, it's great, but we really do want to figure out ways in which, say, if there's an emerging issue that pops up, and if we have the ability to raise funds to meet that need, or if we have the ability to partner with another organization who shares that priority, we would like to see if we can figure out a way to get a little bit more money out the door a little more regularly. So a lot of this has yet to be defined, but at a higher level, I think we'll be evolving to be certainly more data-driven, that deeper learning, and then to align that with what you see going out the door in terms of grants. And doing so, along with that laser focus, will, I think, help us in articulating a little bit better the impact of our work. We've done great things over a long time. We've funded, I don't know, 30 some different organizations over time, but we want to be able to concisely tie that together so the impact is a little bit more palpable for folks in the community.
Great. Thanks, Mary.
I think-
Sue, Kelly, Sarah. Oh, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the fund has and can continue to just be a spotlight on the work that's already being done that helps support women in our community. And so I think that's the curiosity of just getting involved and seeing where impact is being made, and making sure to be loud about it, making sure to get that information out into the community very regularly, so that we can celebrate, champion as a community, and also build up community understanding and allyship for these, for all of these issues that women are facing. By doing that, we can always feel current, you know, that it won't feel like we have to do a catch up every 3 or 4 years, but that we are shifting and evolving with our community in order to support and meet the needs out there, for sure.
Great. You know, it's also really just, I loved watching the foundation's evolution with this discussion with the Women's Fund, right? The foundation hired Marley Samuels 5 years ago now, and Marley came with the nonprofit education and has been really helpful to the foundation. And I've just loved working with her on really thinking about trust-based approaches to philanthropy, things that I knew from my past, but to step into this organization and having a team already thinking about that and moving our discussions as a grant maker on a number of fronts. And then just seeing this education both ways it's been really, really great, because I can see a lot of ways that we all support each other's work. If you have a question, please don't hesitate to jump on the chat or raise your hand, and we'll get you into the conversation for sure. And while we're waiting to see if anyone has a question, Sue, do you want to talk a little bit more about the work on the endowment? I know Mary talked about, you know, we've got ideas for more short-term types of fund development to meet an emerging need, which the Women's Fund has always done, which is really kind of cool. But the endowment has been a focal point. What are some of the ideas of thinking about the endowment going forward?
Yeah, well, one thing for sure, we want to continue to grow it. And so we are putting kind of our finishing touches on we're calling it our resource development plan, which growing the endowment is one of them. And in the past, we've had campaigns that have had 3-year commitment cycles, and that has worked pretty successfully. So we are putting the finishing touches on where do we want to have that next cycle kind of to start and stop, and what's the dollar amount that we want to have it go with. So, but ultimately, our long-term goal is going to be pretty audacious, just like it was, originally here as we were stretching towards the $1 million. That we're looking at a fairly sizable long-term goal, and we'll be having more details come out on that as we go forward. But another part of it is we created the Women's Fund created the Helen's Giving Circle. A few years ago, we realized that a number of our original donors are progressing through the years and are looking to set up their long-term giving through the estate, their estate plans. And so that is something that we are also going to be promoting and making sure people understand the opportunity to make the Women's Fund as part of their estate plan and become a part of Helen's Giving Circle. Today we have 5 women that, and it could be men as well, but we have 5 women that have done so, and we'd like to grow that number substantially. Now, I don't also want to, we talk about the endowment, and that's a little bit longer, or the giving circle, that might be a little bit longer term strategy. I also want to talk about, we welcome all gifts. And we certainly want to continue some of the social connections. Our Women's Fund has been known to have some very nice and fun events that socially connect people in our community, and a lot of them are women that are joining it. So we're going to continue to do that, and we want to generate new prospects every year. We know we have women that are coming new to the community, or perhaps are getting their professional career starting and wanting to make contributions to philanthropic organizations. And so we're planning some things to help generate new prospects as well. So really, our resource development plan is a multi-pronged approach to how you can become part of the Women's Fund.
Thanks, Sue. Kelly, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to add that the Helen's Giving Circle was named after Helen Godfrey, who made the very first gift through her estate plans to the Women's Fund. And that's how the name sort of derived, and it actually started as Helen R. Godfrey's Circle of Friends, and we've sort of shortened it through the years to Helen's Giving Circle, just for marketing reasons. But yes, she was for those who don't know, she was quite an inspirational leader at the university, did a lot for our community through a variety of different organizations. I believe the Child Care Center at the university is named in her honor. She was instrumental in helping us start ours here at the Y as well, and just had a true passion for women and children in our community.
Thanks, Kelly. Such a great story. Paula has a question for us. Thanks, Paula. Oops, hold on. I just lost it. Let me just scroll up here. Here we go. Do you know how the Women's Fund here compares to other women's philanthropic organizations around the state? Great question. Does anybody want to? I can give a little bit about, we did a lot of research going into the strategic plan, and what we were noticing is those women's funds that have really grown, like Green Bay, Fox Valley, had a staff person that was charged with holding all the pieces together, as Kelly talked about, and working with the volunteers. So that was definitely one of the pieces of learning we took. That sorts of.
Jenny, I think
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think you froze up temporarily.
Oh.
I would only add that most of the women's funds that we looked at were based within foundations. You know, it's a big operation to run a foundation or a fund. And so that continued partnership with the community foundation really takes care of fund management, investment stuff, and you know, we're happy to have that in place and focus on some other things at this point. So there's one also in Madison, and it's part of the community foundation down there.
Thanks, Mary.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we got another question from Becky from Marshfield Clinic. Hi, Becky. It's so great to see you on. I love to hear how Mary was talking about re-envisioning the grant making process and support for other organizations. Do you see opportunity to support organizations in filling the gap they experience based on other funding streams like federal funding restrictions, unrealistic timeframes, lack of ability to access funding for building or flexible staffing?
So I guess if I'm understanding the question, we want to be lighter on our feet. The caveat is we still have limitations on how much we would award. So part of what flipped in my mind was a capital campaign. You know, the breast cancer certainly was one we did in the past, but that was over several years. So, but I do think we do want to value and recognize our partners, whether they've gotten grants in the past or not, because that helps us in our learning. It helps us advance our mission. And so we would be looking for learning opportunities to help us be better informed, not only during grant making time, but throughout the year, because there are other ways we can, I think, support women in our community. And maybe they're educational sessions just to inform everybody, not just the people within the fund. And whether or not we can have multiple cycles through the year, it's probably too soon to commit to that. But I do think we are shifting. And so maybe some of the things you have on your wish list will come, but I can't promise they'll be this year.
Mary, that's a great segue. So I would love, Becky, could you come put your video on and come off mute? There she is. So I've been getting to know Becky because I think Fred's on here too. We're on the executive committee for the United Way's Life Report. And so Becky, I know we've had a little bit of discussion about women. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about what you're seeing as issues for women in Portage County?
You know, I don't know that well, I mean, we can speak to the life report. You know, we've already done that prioritization process, seeing housing, childcare, mental health, and substance use coming forward. Those aren't surprising to any of us. And Mary, as you spoke as well, those are issues that they're not new. We've been seeing these things. And I think that's kind of where my question was stemming from is, there are issues that have been ongoing in our community, and a lot of important partners have been spending a lot of time and energy working on them. And I was just thinking about, and I think we spend a lot of time in our life report group thinking about, like, what else is missing? Why aren't we moving these things forward? What are those gaps? And what do we need to do to lift up the organizations that are already there? Is it a little thing like these silly timeframes on the federal funding, or the restrictions that they change staff every 2 years because there's a new funding cycle and someone can't stay through grant making? Or, you know, I'm just trying to think, is this an opportunity for us to hone in on some of these areas where the data is showing the need? We know we have amazing partners in our community doing great work, but what's the little thing that might push them over the edge to get us to that next step?
Yeah. Yeah, it's also interesting too, Becky, like I think we've talked about, we've also got such better data to see where women are really struggling. I was thinking about actually Cindy Yang, who's on the Women's Fund board, sharing with us that I forget this exact stat, but it was really shocking to me how many women are dying from their partner, the murder in domestic violence. You know, just last week we were talking about how in the world So the United States has 5% of the global population, but globally we incarcerate 1/3 of all the women in prison in the United States. And, like those things are playing out right here in our communities. So there are these, just the focus on women is giving us better data as well. And some of it's really startling. And hopefully that then in turn helps us, to Becky's point, start to know where we can have some impact. Sarah, did you want to jump in? Did you have a couple of things you wanted to share?
I was taking notes, so thank you. But I mean, I wonder if in programming or in just supporting some kind of programming in grant writing, in those kind of grant workshops for some of the more major funding that folks are typically going to look after, and even doing, I can see, kind of diving in into grants that maybe aren't as widely known or used, just as a service, in order to propel people to feel more confident and comfortable in looking for those grant monies beyond all of the sort of local routes for grant making here as well.
Great idea, Sarah. It's a reminder that philanthropy, our grant making is never going to compare to the federal government, but how do you leverage local philanthropy to make sure that what is coming back to our communities and our tax dollars is the most useful to our communities as well? Yeah. Any other questions anyone has? Or even for the group that joined us today, do you have questions for each other? All right, well, we want to thank everybody for joining us today. This has been a great discussion. I hope you're excited about the Women's Fund. If you want to learn more or get on some of the communication lists that we'll be putting out, Sarah will be putting out some more communication on some next steps, please don't hesitate to reach out. And our next community lunch hour is going to be May 8th, and Marley is going to join us to talk about our major grant cycle at the foundation. So this will be the 3rd year we are doing a major grant, which is up to between $25,000 and $50,000 to one organization that is having a broad impact on, or project that's having a broad impact on the people of Portage and Washera counties. So you can join us on May 8th to learn about that process and timeline for all that. So we hope to see you then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.